3,000 years before there was a single study on reference groups. Proverbs said, walk with the wise and become wise. And so, in 9 words, Proverbs taught us about the importance of reference groups. What is a reference group? A reference group is a group whose standards you measure yourself against and calibrate your behavior to, whether or not you actually belong to it yet. Now, I wrote down 2 different kinds of reference groups. Reference group number 1 is a membership reference group. And so, this is a group that you are in. This is your current circle. It sets your baseline right now, usually without you even noticing. And so I'm going to talk about it in a way here that is maybe disempowering, but maybe you're in a group that's amazing, and this is somewhat irrelevant to you. But this is more so for the individuals that are around the people who maybe aren't lifting them up. This group is where downgrades on your standard silently happen. So these are the people that you're around every single day. Now, an aspirational reference group, what is that? It's a group you are aiming at. You adopt its standards ahead of arrival. This is the upgrade. This is the constructive pull, and it's quietly raising your standards. I would tell you that SIP, honestly, is a thing. A huge reason SIP is a thing, and it's grown in the way that it has, is because of aspirational reference groups. I always joke with Michaela, who is my girlfriend, and I tell her that it's lonely and it's tough because the people that I'm always quote unquote comparing myself to are people that are like category kings. So when I was getting into sales and I was learning these skills, I was comparing myself, and I say that lightly because I'm being inspired by Alex Hormozy. As I created my podcast, I was comparing myself or being inspired by Stephen Bartlett, who is the Diary of a CEO Cat. And so I'm always referencing these people who are so excellent at what they do, and in a way, it's never enough for me because they're so good that I'm always chasing. But it's not for me chasing in a bad way. It's being inspired. I want to be inspired by people who are doing excellent work. And those are the people that I look to when I am thinking about who I want to be. That's like an aspirational reference group. And so I do think it's important for us to reference Romans 12 too. If you've listened to this podcast, you know it's one of my favorite Bible verses. It's written by Paul, Romans is, and it teaches us not to conform to this world. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. And so the first line it tells us is not to conform. What does conformity even mean? And for those of you out there that are Stranger Things lovers, I am hoping that the conformity gate is real and that Stranger Things has episode 9. But that's a tangent. What is conformity? It's changing your behaviors and opinions or judgments to match a group because of real or imagined social pressure. So then I broke it into 2 different kinds of conformity. There's informational conformity. You go along because you think that the groups know something that you don't. You treat them as evidence about reality. Now, normative conformity is the second one. It says that you go along because you want to be accepted, or you don't want the social cost of standing out. You might privately disagree, but publicly comply. So we're clear on what conformity is. I listened to this great preacher, and he says, what do we have to do to conform to this world? And the answer is nothing. And so, of course, the scripture calls us to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I think every single podcast I talk about, at some point, I find a way to bring that into the topic because I think it's so empowering to be conscious and to consciously direct your subconscious and to tell yourself what's important and to remind yourself of who you are, to be transformed by the renewing of your mind, to take thoughts captive, 2 Corinthians 10:5, and make them obedient to what Christ says about you. That is the renewal of mind process in my eyes. It's tangible. But I do understand that we are going to conform. That's human nature. We are flesh, and our flesh does what's easy and what's comfortable a lot of the time. And so, maybe it's unconscious for a lot of us, but we will conform. And so this podcast, in a lot of ways, is, if we're going to conform, let's conform to a group that is empowering, a group of people that is aligned with who we want to be. When I first left baseball, used to go to my dad's gym in the community that he lives in, and I would listen to Alex Hormozy, and he would always talk about resetting his minimum standard. He would go around people that were getting it at such a high level that it would reset his standard for what great looked like. And I think that's one of the most empowering things that we can have in our life is to surround ourselves with people who reset our minimum standard and reset our minimum standard often. Included this tweet from him. He says, I was talking to a friend of mine who decided to recently get into content. He asked why my content was getting more reach than his. Well, I said, I don't know. We put out 250 per week. How many pieces a week are you putting out? He replied, I'm posting a measly once a day. Ha! Thank you for resetting my minimum standard. He's already an incredibly successful man, more than me, Alex says, and it instantly clicked for him. Volume. But there's more to it than that. I've had this happen to me in business more times than I can count. I think, oh, I should just do 30% more, 50% more. But the people who are beating me aren't doing 50% more. They're doing 50 times more. Big difference. We think we're doing something wrong, but in reality, we aren't doing nearly enough of it. This is like the idea that what got you here won't get you there. Well, it's like, no, maybe it will. Maybe it's just more of what got you here will get you there. He finishes the tweet by saying, to get 5 times the results, sometimes you have to put in 50 times the effort. And I love that. And I'm not looking at anybody telling them to, make their job an idol or make their sport an idol and constantly be doing more, 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 more. That's not really the message here, but I think it's a good example of resetting your minimum standard. I kind of am hesitant to lean too far into that hustle culture mindset, especially after reading books like The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, God Has a Name, Garden City. Like Garden City tells us that, we're made in the image of God. We're made to be a visible representation of an invisible God. We're meant to shine his light. A lamp is not lit to be dimmed. We're meant to be excellent. We're meant to have unwavering focus. That's what Jesus had. So we're meant to be great at what we do, to be totally committed to one thing for sure. That's it for me. But then you read Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, and he tells you that the devil doesn't need to make you sin. He just needs to make you hurry. He just needs to make you frenzied, busy, and you'll take your eyes off of God. And so for me personally, I'm still trying to find that balance as to, what is me giving my very best, but also creating space to rest, because rest is a skill. And when you talk about what God blessed in Genesis, God blesses the sea creatures and birds to be fruitful and multiply. So he tells the sea creatures and birds to be fruitful and multiply, create more life. He then says in Genesis 1:28, God blesses Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, procreate. And then in the third one, God blessed the Sabbath day. That's Genesis 2, verse 3. It says, then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. And so the way that John Mark Comer talks about this is that rest actually, creates more life. You guys should look up the Seventh Day Adventists and how much longer they lived when they were practicing Sabbath. And so that's again not what this podcast is about. But as I talk about Hormozy, I'm not trying to get you to work 1,000 times harder and grind, grind, grind. And it's not really what I'm saying. I'm just talking to you about people that reset your standards for what it means to be faithful, for what it means to be hardworking, for what it means to be committed to a process. But I do believe that success leaves clues, and you can reference anybody in your life. You can have reference points for all different areas of your life. Again, aspirational reference groups, people that you look up to, maybe that aren't even in your community that are doing things that you want to do. Here's some aspirational reference groups that I have. Kurt Signetti. I love how standards driven he is. I love how neutral and consistent he is. Nick Saban. I love how he can take in a group of guys who have never been led in this kind of way, in such a direct and high standards way, and he can get them all to work towards one dream. I think it's incredible that he had 4 coaches that were descendants of Nick Saban in his coaching tree that were all in the college football playoff this year. I just think it's proof that success leaves clues. And there's a language there, there's a philosophy there that if you follow, you can raise the standards of others and we can all work together to accomplish one goal. It's inspiring. I wrote down Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso is a fictional character, but the way he loves the players, the way he is considerate, the way he is compassionate, the way he listens to understand, the way he loves these guys is inspiring for me. As I work with athletes every single day, Ted Lasso is always a aspirational reference group for me. He's been on my mood board, on my vision boards for forever. To be curious and not judgmental. and to forgive. Like in so many ways, Ted Lasso, if you watch it from a biblical point of view, he is living out everything it tells us to be in the Bible. So Ted Lasso's one. I mentioned Stephen Bartlett. Diary of a CEO is one for me for podcasting. Bob Rotella, one of the greatest sports psychs ever, golf guy. I love how he goes about his business, and that's one of the first people that I ever consumed from. That's a reference point for me. I wrote down Harvey Dorfman. That's a reference point for me. He's probably the greatest mental performance coach for baseball ever. Inspiring. For faith, I have people in my life. These are close friends of mine. These are people that are currently in my life who inspire me. For faith, Jack Moss plays pro baseball for the Astros. Jack O'Dowd, pro baseball for the Rockies. Caden Davis had some time in the NFL, played at Ole Miss. Blake Hammond, he is a pro baseball player as well with the A's. Will Shipley, he is a pro football player with the Eagles. More importantly, every single one of these guys is grounded in their faith and their identity is in Christ. Whenever I talk to these people, it resets my standard for what it means to be faithful. Jack Moss was one of the first people to ever introduce me to my faith. And, now I host a Bible study and Jack Moss is on there. It's just full circle and humbling. But when I hear these individuals talk about God and I hear them talk about the scripture, and Jack Moss tells me that he can't meet on a Monday because he's honoring his Sabbath, like that's so inspiring for me. And that's a reminder for me to, maybe honor God in a greater way and have a day of rest. That's a reference point that changes how I live just because of who they are. I look at business. My pops, my dad is such a reference point for me. I grew up seeing it all the time, and I see him go into a company and change the entire culture, and the performance improves drastically. Inspiring. I wrote down Michael Smoke. Shout out my guy Higher Up Wellness. Michael Smoke has been a reference point for me since before I started making content. I saw him doing it, and I was like, man, I think I could do something like this. And I didn't even know him at the time. This was just a guy that I saw on TikTok. How about that? And now Michael Smoke has a sip hoodie. Michael Smoke and I are in talks of potentially doing a podcast. So if you guys want that, go ahead and send him a DM. Shout out my guy Michael Smoke. But that's somebody that I was always looking at. Wow, he look at how frequently he posts. Look at how intentional and authentic he is. That's something that I could do. That's a reference point. My boy Jimmy Johnson. Jimmy works, he's a partial owner in a company called Say Come Say. I encourage you guys all to go on YouTube and look up the Genius series. They take the best minds and they have them do a 15-minute breakdown of their area of expertise. And it's better than this short form dopamine content. And so Jimmy has created this with his partner, and it's something beautiful that he's created. And I see the level of intentionality that goes into it. And even though it's not in the same field, my dad, Michael Smoke, Jimmy, none of us are in the same field, but I take inspiration from each and every single one of them on how I run my business. I wrote down love, my reference point for love, people in my life who reset my standard for what it means to be loving. My girlfriend, Michaelin, is like the best at loving people that I've ever seen. She meets everywhere and everybody where they're at, and she's compassionate, she's graceful. When you think about the fruits of the spirit, she has all of them. She has all of them, and it's made me slow down. It's truly changed who I am. Like you got to realize that for a man, the greatest force multiplier that's sneaky is the woman that you choose to be with. And Michaelin has softened my heart, has opened my eyes to what it means to be more loving to people and more considerate. And then the last category that I just mentioned was creativity. There's this cat on TikTok named Kale Brown. You guys got to look him up. But he made this video about how he designs every piece of clothing. It's handmade. And then he also makes these TikTok videos of him dancing. And the editing process is insane because he basically records him doing the dance in 6 different outfits, all wearing the clothes that he made. In a way, it's him promoting his brand. He's selling his merch that way. It's incredible how creative. But he's doing the same dance 6 different times. Then he shows you how he edits it in Premiere Pro to make it look like they're all on the basketball court that he's dancing on at the same time. And so it's an incredible video. He shows how he scripts out his content to make these dancing videos, how he edits it, how he designs the clothes, how he choreographs it. Like it's all incredible. And I'm like, man, that's creativity. That's a man that is creating space to think creatively. And that's something that I struggle with. I'm like, literally, I need to create more space to think creatively. And I see somebody like that, and I'm like, oh, that's what it looks like. Reference point. Julia Cameron, Anne Lamott, my boy Billy Oppenheimer, Rick Rubin. These are all people that are reference points for me that I do not see every day. But when I think about my standards, I always think about them for each respective category. Higher standards can feel like imposter syndrome. It can feel like you're fraudulent. It can feel like pressure. And what I have found is that discomfort is typically when I know that I'm on the right path. So expect it. When you start looking to people that are getting it at a higher level, like, yeah, you're going to be challenged. And I think that's the entire point. But eventually, just as when the bar lowers in the groups that you are in and you don't even notice it, when the bar gets higher, I mean, you might notice it, but over time it becomes normal because you adapt. And now that is just your normal. Now that is just your standard. You have reset your minimum standard. I worked under this cat for 3 years who's just a savage and he's pulling all-nighters. He's obsessed with what he does. He'll rip 30 podcasts in one day. And I had never seen anything like it. I had never seen anything like it. He had multiple kids and would just grind. And in a lot of ways, for those 3 years, I was borrowing a higher minimum before I had technically earned it. And then eventually it became my normal because I was around it every day, which I just think is one of the most empowering things. It's facts. Like the moment that you get around better people, you become a better human being. Now, a little research that I was doing, because again, I'm a researcher more than I am a coach. I was inspired by one conversation I had with Kaylee, and now I just want to dedicate an entire podcast where I research this idea. There's this group called, I think it's O Power, and they mailed 600,000 households a report, just a single envelope. And what they were doing was they were comparing their energy to the use of their neighbors. Now, there was a 2% drop. And what I read when I was doing my research, because I don't know much about this, is 2% isn't crazy, but I just think it's crazy that there even was a drop in their energy usage. And the 6.3% drop was for the heaviest users. So that's better. And still, I think that's just pretty interesting that all they received was an envelope telling them how their energy usage is compared to their neighbors. And it led to a drop. Now, they kept mailing these letters, and this proves a point. They kept mailing these letters, and this simple, repeated social comparison changed real behavior without changing anyone's incentives. And so when they continued to do it, this is you continuing to be around this group of people that are just better people, it slowly compounds and it slowly changes who you are. And so enough repeated letters had partly, quote unquote, installed the lower usage as the new normal. And it mostly stuck once the reminder stopped. And so because they kept sending these reminders, they kept being reminded of what their neighbors were using, how much energy they were using. It just changed their behavior and how much they are using. It doesn't happen at once, but it's when you are continuously around this reference group that things begin to change for you. There's something called the Asch experiment. In Solomon Asch's 1951 conformity experiment, subjects were placed in a group, secretly all actors, and they were asked to judge which of these three lines matched a reference line, a task with an objectively obvious answer. So they have three lines and they ask which of these lines matches those lines. So again, they had three lines and then they had a reference line and they asked them, hey, which of these three lines is the same as the reference line? Which one matches the reference line? And it's a very obvious answer. But when the actors unanimously gave the wrong answer, the subjects conformed to that wrong answer on about 37% of the trials, and 75% did so at least once, demonstrating that social pressure can override direct sensory evidence. They denied what their own eyes were telling them, just to not be the odd one out. Now, the second piece of research that I want to share with you is about peer effects. There's these meta-analyses that find that peer influence on behaviors like academics, aggression, and substance use is statistically small on any single measure, but consistent and directional across time. The effect compounds through repeated cumulative exposure rather than through any single decisive interaction. So that's a lot of words. Let's dumb this down. No single handout is going to change who you are. This is the example I just gave you guys of the energy usage. Just one letter doesn't really change it for the long term. That's what makes it sneaky. It's not one big moment, it's 1,000 tiny ones. What your circle laughs at, what they shrug off, what they treat as no big deal. Each one nudges you a hair. You're always practicing something. You never feel the nudge, but stack 10,000 of them all leaning the same way over a couple years and you wake up a different person. Now, my third piece of research here is all about how you catch people's nervous systems. And I was hesitant to even put this in here because I'm not so sure how relevant it is to necessarily reference groups. What I'm trying to communicate is that from an unconscious standpoint, you do receive people's nervous systems. And so who you're around does matter. So here's the research. It says humans automatically, unconsciously, mimic the faces, postures, and tones of the people that are near them, and they also catch their emotions as well. You felt it. You walk into a tense room, call it a tense locker room, and your body tightens before anyone even says a word. You sit with a calm person and your breathing slows. You're not deciding to, your nervous system is syncing to theirs. That's crazy. Now, a calm nervous system literally settles an anxious one nearby. It is why a baby calms when it's held by a calm parent, and why a panicked parent makes a baby worse. We regulate each other's physiology in real time. As a coach, it's my job to be regulated and grounded. And when I go in to meet with an athlete, it is my job to show up in that state because they are receiving my nervous system. You can catch someone else's stress by just watching them be stressed. An observer's cortisol, and you know we're trying to be low cortisol, baby. An observer's cortisol can rise simply from watching a stranger struggle. Again, you don't just pick up people's opinions, you pick up their physiology. It's amazing. You sit next to anxiety long enough and your body learns anxiety. You sit next to peace long enough and your body will learn peace. You are catching them whether you agree to that or not. So I just think that's cool because when you have these groups of people that are your reference groups, maybe these are your friends, maybe these are the people you're aspiring to be like. When you are watching them, when you are around these people, you are receiving their nervous system. And if you're not striving to be like these people because these people are not people that inspire you, maybe, or maybe they're not getting it at a high level, or maybe they're living a disempowering life, you are receiving that nervous system as well. So that's why I threw it in there. Now, to wrap up this research, I have a couple more examples of why being around better people just elevates who you are. Workers literally get more productive around better workers. A classic workplace study tracked supermarket cashiers. When higher productivity coworkers were added to a shift, other workers increased effort. A 10% increase in coworker productivity was associated with about a 1.7% increase in a worker's effort. Even replacing a below average worker with an above average worker raised the coworker's productivity by about 1.1%. Students do better when they are surrounded by better students. Peer effect research has found that students' achievement is affected by the achievement level of classmates. One estimate found that a 1 point increase in peers' reading scores raised a student's own score by 0.15 or zero point 0.4 points. Other research on randomly assigned roommates and dorm mates found that peers can affect academic effort, study habits, and social group decisions. Again, environment quietly is rewiring what feels normal for us. You look at Serena and Venus Williams. I love looking at athletes that grew up in homes of a big league dad or a mom who played professional sports. Look at Christian McCaffrey. Like dad is an NFL receiver, mom is I think she ran track at Stanford. Look at who he became. Look at who all the kids became. It's amazing. I think that's so cool when, over and over again, you see these kids that grew up around around greatness and they become great. It's not always that way, but it's relevant. So with Serena and Venus Williams, Serena, who is viewed probably as the more successful one, she didn't develop in isolation. She developed with her sister, Venus. Venus, who was older, elite, and a direct measuring stick. The Williams sisters practiced for hours daily on public courts. They became one of the most successful sibling duos ever. Together, they won 14 Grand Slam doubles titles and 3 Olympic doubles gold medals. Serena won 23 Grand Slam singles titles, while Venus won 7. The next one is PayPal Mafia. PayPal was not just a company, it became a talent dense room. This is very cool. You should look into it. After eBay bought PayPal in 2002, Elon Musk was a part of this. Former PayPal people went on to build or fund companies like Tesla, SpaceX, LinkedIn, YouTube, Palantir, Yelp, Affirm, and Facebook. That's unreal. This is just the power of being around brighter people. C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, who I mentioned on the last podcast, were part of the Inklings, which was an Oxford literary group that met regularly to read unfinished work. They would critique ideas, they would push each other intellectually. The group became important to works like The Lord of the Rings and obviously C.S. Lewis and his major writings. You become what your nervous system starts calling normal. Now, the next part of this I just want to share is I have a fascination with winning cultures. I think winning cultures are a trickle down effect. A lot of the time it starts at the top. And I would say most of the time it starts at the top. And shout out PJ Fleck, but he says the hardest part of being the standard is that you are the standard. And so when you look at these great coaches that I'm about to talk about, they come into a program that maybe isn't as successful or flat out is just they are unsuccessful and they have to come in and they have to actually be the standard. They don't have, necessarily people in that building that are aligned yet. And so they have to wake up every day and choose to be that person before everybody else follows. That's what being a leader is. The hardest part about being the standard is that you are the standard. You have to wake up and do it every single day. And when you think about these cultures that are disempowering, to come in there every single day and to get a group of individuals to be aligned towards one goal and to speak the same language and to be committed to the process is extremely challenging. And so I have a couple coaches that I always love to reference. Nick Saban, a couple quotes from Nick Saban. He says, "The standard is the standard. You must keep everyone on the same standards. Mediocre people don't like high achievers. High achievers don't like mediocre people. Somebody defines the expectation, and then you have to be accountable to it." Bill Belichick was the one that led Saban. Saban now has led all these coaches. Again, the college football playoff, all four of them were descendants of Saban. Success leaves clues. Curt Cignetti, I've made an entire podcast on Curt Cignetti. He says there's no magic in Indiana football, it's just the fundamentals. He's communicated clearly what the standards are, what they accept for their program, and then he holds everybody in that program accountable to that standard. And what follows, they win a national championship. They have a Heisman Trophy winner for the first time, I believe, ever. Crazy. He says, "I detected an attitude that you couldn't get it done here." Again, it's a conformity thing. Everybody at Indiana, the whole school felt like you couldn't get it done there, especially for the football team. He says the general attitude of the people I met and the lack of excitement made me furious. He says it was a clashing of two worlds and I wasn't going to lower my standards. Now, a couple other coaches who I think are pretty inspiring that I think do a great job of setting a standard for the team and holding them to it. There's a girl named Erin Matson who I've recently learned about, who I'm unbelievably impressed by. Uh, she was a player first. She arguably was the most decorated player in the sport's history. She's a field hockey coach in North Carolina. She's got 4 national titles when she played. She was a 5-time All-American, a 3-time National Player of the Year at UNC. 1 month after graduating at age 22, she became UNC's head coach, the youngest head coach ever in Division I athletics. In her first season, she led UNC to the 2023 National Championship, becoming the youngest college head coach in NCAA history to win a national championship at 23. The program's 11th title, the 5th and 6th years, she did it coaching her own former teammates. How cool is that? Now, why am I mentioning her in this podcast? Well, I think she's a great representation of everything we're talking about. She didn't chase a standard, she was a standard as a player, and then had to turn around and set that standard for the people who had been her peers days earlier. One, she was a reference point for them as she was playing, but two, she's now holding them to an even higher standard in a way because she's coaching them. I think that's amazing. And she's 23 years old. It's the purest version of the hardest part of being the standard is that you're the standard. Now, in her own words, let's hear this. She says, "How I run the program is that we need to always expect high standards and never be satisfied. But at the same time, striking that balance of, I believe in you and you can do this." It's incredible. That's a woman that knows what she is doing. The player who scored the title-winning goal said of Matson, who was the head coach, "She made me a better person and a better player." Somebody who's transferred, they said it's a competitive program, it's a winning program, it's a winning culture. People transfer into a standard. They're coming to this culture because they want to be around people that have higher standards. Dan Campbell, I'm a big Dan Campbell guy. Shout out the Lions. The Lions had won just 14 games combined in 3 prior seasons. They had not made the playoffs since 2017. It was a losing culture that Dan Campbell walked into, and he refused to conform to it. You guys got to look up the interviews. It's incredible. He says, "We're going to kick you in the teeth. And when you punch us back, we're going to smile at you. And when you knock us down, we're going to get up. And on the way, we're going to bite a kneecap off." That is the culture. That is the standard. That is the requirement if you're going to be a Lion. That's who you're going to be. And he's setting the standard from day one. And when we do, we're going to take another hunk out of you. Before long, we're going to be the last one standing. That's going to be the mentality. So immediately he is setting the vision for who they are going to be. What is the identity of the team? The team would take on the identity of the city of Detroit. This city's been down and it's found a way to get up. He says, any loss that we take, we are going to feel the full pain from it and not be numb to it. Refusing to go numb to losing is the exact opposite of this silent downgrade that we're talking about. They're staying conscious. Their reference point, their reference group is a group of winners, a group of people that are high standards. They're not going to avoid the pain of losing. They're going to confront it. He would not let the room adapt to defeat. He and the GM, Brad Holmes, then rebuilt through the draft with one of the league's youngest rosters. 85 players saw the field in year one. That's crazy. He didn't inherit a standard, he installed one and he drafted into it. It's incredible. So what were the results? In 2021, they went 3-13-1. In 2022, they went 9-8, the first winning season since 2017. In 2023, they went 12-5, the first division title in 30 years. First playoff win since 1991, an NFC championship. In 2024, they went 15-2. Franchise records for wins. They were the number one NFC seed for the first time ever. They went from 3 wins to 9 to 12 to 15. Now in 2025, they went 8-9 and they missed the playoffs. They were last in their division. And so that's worth referencing because a standard has to be held. And I don't think that's because Dan Campbell isn't holding the standard, but it's relevant because very quickly you can go right back to who you once were. We've mentioned that a couple times on this podcast, but there is something to be said about constantly being reminded. We have to be reminded more than we have to be taught. My last person I was going to reference as just a unbelievable coach for resetting the standards is Ted Lasso. You ought to just go watch Ted Lasso. Now, for this next part of this podcast, I just want to tell you how I've seen this within the athletes that I work with. I'm working with somewhere just south of 60 people, and a majority of these individuals are athletes. And I have one athlete who just lost a national championship and was extremely disappointed, but gets on the call with me. And this is a school that just won the national championship last year. And all she does is she takes ownership and she takes accountability and she addresses the areas that she needs to be better. She has high expectations for herself. Not one time after losing in the national championship game did she blame anybody else. She shared with me her areas of opportunity. She shared with me, not even a week later after losing the national championship, what she was looking to get out of her offseason and the work that we're doing together to step into being an even greater leader. I think that's incredible. I think it's a reflection of, the culture that she's in, a culture, a winning culture, a group of people who are getting it at a high level. They don't accept that for their culture. And so, of course, when she comes to me and she's talking to me, there's no gossip, there's no complaining. She has a elite mindset. I have another individual who is he was one of the number one guys in the entire transfer portal this year. He's an incredible athlete, and he came off an incredible season, and he transferred out because he wanted to go to a school that had higher standards, that he could be around people every single day who were more bought in, who cared more. I have an individual that's playing in the NHL, just an absolute beauty. Like, I absolutely love this guy. And he's from Canada, and he is training with 20 professional hockey players who are playing in the NHL. He shared with me that 8 of them are considered the best players in the game currently. So if you're a hockey individual, you can imagine the 8 best players. And there's a good chance that a majority of them are training at this facility with him in this group setting. Like literally the best player ever is training in this group with him. And he tells me that statistically he is the worst in that room, black and white, unemotional. And I just think it's cool because if you think about it, this group of people that he's surrounded himself with is bringing out the best in him. And on his worst day where he struggles, it's better than most people's best days because he's around better people. Now, I've also worked with athletes who are in cultures that are disempowering and that are toxic and that are losing cultures. They're actually losing, but the mentality within the culture is a losing culture. And I wrote down in my notes that the downgrade is invisible from the inside sometimes because the brain recalibrates this to be normal. I have empathy for these individuals because it's inevitable. You will be around losing cultures at times when you're an athlete. And so, yeah, we have to be greater than our environment. We have to renew our mind. But I'm just really documenting as a researcher what I've seen. I have seen these athletes that are not in as good of cultures, and I've seen how it affects how they show up every single week. So all I'm really trying to drive home is that who you're around really matters. Now, I want to share three stories with you about the power of environment. It complements what I'm telling you right now about these athletes that I'm working with. But the first one is the story of the Vietnam War and heroin. This is an Atomic Habits, so you might have heard this one. But in 1971, heroin use explodes amongst US soldiers in Vietnam. It was so serious that the Army set up urine screenings to catch users before they fly home. Nixon, who was fresh off declaring drugs as public enemy number one, commissions researcher Lee Robbins to track what happens when these men come home. Around 34% of them used heroin. Around 20% of them showed signs of dependence. It was real addiction for these individuals to the drug everyone believed was a life sentence. Now, here's the most outrageous part. Once home, only about 1% of them relapsed in the first year. Around 12% of them relapsed over 3 years. Roughly 9 out of 10 addicts simply stopped cold turkey. And it's worth mentioning that during this time, the average addict relapsed around 90% of the time. Now, my second example is about rats. There's these rats in these bear cages, and they are given plain water versus morphine water. And they hammer the morphine water, the drug. And sometimes they do this to death. They literally die because they're drinking so much of the morphine water. And so we understand that the drug is irresistible, or at least we thought it was. The twist here is that the researcher, Bruce Alexander, builds a rat park. It's big and it's an enriched enclosure. There's a lot more space and there's other rats, but there's also still the same rats and there's still the same morphine. And here's the most outrageous part. The rat park rats largely ignored the drug. Even when it was sweetened, even the rats that were already made dependent. The same chemical, the same rat, it was just a different environment, opposite behavior. So these rats are no longer hammering on the morphine water because of the environment. They're largely ignoring the drug. That's insane. Now, my third example is the Stanford prison experiment. So there's these individuals that are screened as normal college kids. They're randomly assigned whether they're a guard or they're a prisoner. It's a fake basement prison. Coin flip decides who you are. And the outrageous part is within days, the guards turned cruel. The prisoners break and go submissive so fast and so severe that the 2 week study is shut down after 6 days. These people changed who they were. Nobody's personality predicted it. The role in the room is what predicted it. It's insane. So it's just proof that environment really is the invisible hand that shapes human behavior. We got to be very intentional about the environments we go into. And if you're an athlete that's looking to go play college sports, you should be very particular in where you go. You should consider everything about the school. What are the people like? Do you want to be more like these people? Well, if not, you probably shouldn't go there. Now, to conclude this, I really just want to share some scripture with you because I think it's interesting how it ties together. Before I was really serious in my faith, hated the idea of church. I hated the idea of community. I had my relationship with God. That was all I needed. And as I've grown in my faith, I have learned that it is necessary for a Christian to be in community. The worst thing for a Christian to be is isolated. Isolation makes you have bad doctrine often. And so this kind of complements the idea of reference groups and community, a community of people that is grounded and aligned with who you want to be. Proverbs 18:1. Whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire. He breaks out against all sound judgment. When you are isolated, it's easy to have bad doctrine. Scripture directly links isolation to losing your grip on truth. The next one is Proverbs 27:17. It says, iron sharpens iron as one man sharpens another. I'm sure you've heard that. Colossians 2:19. This is what we've been covering in church. It says, and not holding fast to the head, from whom the whole body, nourished and knit together through its joints and ligaments, grows with a growth that is from God. And not holding fast to the head, from whom the whole body, the church is the entire body, nourished and knit together through its joints and ligaments. We're the joints and ligaments. That's what it's saying. Grows with a growth that is from God. You grow when you are connected like joints and ligaments. Now, when Paul is talking about this in Colossians, he's describing false teachers and the reason that they went wrong, why they missed the mark. And the reason that they went wrong is because they stopped holding fast to the head, to the person, to Christ. And detachment from the body is the on ramp to that error. When you are not in a community of people that are aligned with Christ, you will not think clearly of Christ. And the greatest form of idolatry is thinking low of Christ, thinking inaccurately of Christ. Thinking is easy, thinking well is hard. If you're ever going to think well, we think well of God, right? Now, Ephesians 4:16 complements it as well. It says, "From whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, when we're all working together in this community, it makes the body grow so that it builds itself up on love." Now, my takeaway is that you only grow rightly when you are joined and held together. Now, the next piece of scripture is 1 Corinthians 12, verse 20 through 21. It says, "As it is, there are many parts, yet one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you." Now, my takeaway is that this "I have no need of you" posture is exactly the self sufficient isolation that leads us to bad doctrine, right? There is no part that is meant to stand alone. What does Romans 12:4 and 5 say? "For as in one body we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function. So we, though many, are one body in Christ, and individually members one of another." All of this is complementing this idea of community. It's complementing this idea of being around people that are aligned with where you want to go and who you want to be. Just as your reference group silently sets your standard for efforts and ambition, your spiritual community, your church, sets your standard for truth. And the second that we disconnect, the guardrail is gone. A Christian alone is not a Christian with pure beliefs. It is a Christian with no one to catch the air. I've been there. I've been there. Now, the last point that I'll make is just that it's been so fruitful for me to be around people who know the word and are grounded. Because when I was doing this on my own, it was easy for me to believe that I could work for heaven. Like ora et labora, pray and work. I love that idea, but it's not working for grace, because grace that you have to work for is not grace. And so when I got around better people, people that understood the word, I understood that there's nothing that I could do to earn heaven. There's nothing that I could do to earn grace. I'm unworthy of it. And when I have ice, when I'm isolated, when I don't have reference groups of people that are grounded by the word and that know the word, it causes me to have this inaccurate doctrine, this bad doctrine, and to think low of God. And again, that's the greatest form of idolatry. So I think it's relevant to what we're talking about. I think it's important for you to know that what you consume is also a reference point. So social media is a reference point. Your algorithm could be your greatest weapon, and it could be your greatest downfall as well. I believe that. A reference group doesn't just have to be the people you know or that you've met. A reference group theory explicitly includes groups you only observe. Your feed on your social media is a reference group you never even agreed to join, which is a little bit scary. The voices, physiques, incomes, work rhythms that you consume daily becomes your normal. I did it with Alex Hormozy. I said that. And you just see they're normal enough. I've seen how Hormozy works enough times that eventually over time, consuming it enough times, it became my reference point for normal. Now, I'm just trying to show you guys that this is just an extension of this principle that we're talking about. What you consume is what you contemplate, and what you contemplate is who you become. Now, to wrap this podcast up, I do think that if you listen to this, it can come across like you're basically just going to be a slave to your environment. And I think that's a potential, a possibility. But what I'm trying to communicate here now is that you have the ability to be that quote unquote one ally. What is the one ally? It is when you are in a bad culture, or you are in this example where everybody's conforming and you're the one that doesn't conform. That is the one ally. It is a single outside voice that makes a higher standard feel possible again. So if you are in a bad culture, you can be that person. I'm not telling you to get rid of your friends. I'm not saying that. I'm telling you to love everybody. But I am telling you that who you look to and who you're around has a direct influence on you. And if you don't want to remove these people from your life, well, maybe you can be the one ally who resets the standard for these people. And again, that's really challenging, because the hardest part about being the standard is that you're the standard. Now, there is a dark side to this. I'll mention that. There's a dark side to reference groups. You can feel worse. I know I have. You can feel like you're not doing enough. It can make you pour into the comparison piece too much. This is why there's so many high performers out there who always feel behind. It's honestly how I feel at times. So take it with a grain of salt. I'm not trying to make you compare yourself more. I'm just trying to encourage you to seek more for yourself and to get around better people, because whether it's conscious or it's unconscious, it has a real influence on you. If you're going to choose to be around a group of people, a community of people, let's be so intentional with that and just ensure that it's a group of people who honor and value the same things that you do. And I'm not here to tell you how to think or who to be. I'm just a researcher that's sharing some of the stuff that I've been intrigued by. And when I am looking at groups of people that I look to, again, maybe I look to them for one topic. Maybe it's one area of my life, the faith piece, the work piece, the relationship piece, the love piece. I think that's the best way to go about it. But I'd say the biggest community that I'm in is a community of believers, of fellow Christians, and these are people that have the same values and beliefs as me. And so I know that if I was going to conform in any way, at least I'm conforming to a group of people who love the Lord their God with all their heart, and that pushes me to be a better man in a lot of ways. So let's stay conscious, let's renew our mind, let's start there, let's be greater than our environment, but let's try to be intentional with who we choose to be around. Thanks for being here. Love you guys. Keep stacking.